and we're good to go.
For me, let's go. Let's go.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Matthias. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for making our time. Hopefully, I didn't make you rush in to get here.
No, no, it's okay. I just gave up on gym this morning, so yeah,
Oh
that's on me.
man,
But yeah,
oh, it's on me.
I'll do
Okay,
it in the
you
afternoon though.
gotta stand up the whole workshop then, man. You gotta burn the
Oh,
calories
okay,
somehow.
yeah.
We gotta get you a standing desk. Okay,
It's okay.
so over the next hour and a bit, we're gonna be talking about basically two principles that are very near and dear to my heart. And first off, we're gonna talking about the phrase where we look at practicing to learn, which seems a bit more intuitive. But then we're also gonna talk about why we need to learn how to practice and how these two really feed into each other. To start off, I really want to take us back to a very extreme example. And I was just watching old Olympic highlights, and obviously Usain Bolt is one of the most decorated Olympians. The Olympics comes around once every 4 years, and in 2012, this was the highlights I was watching for some reason. Usain Bolt ran 3 races for his 100-meter categories. Could you take a guess, just wild guesses, on how long the accumulative sum of those 3 races were? I'll just be tabbing out because I'm on single monitor. I'll be like coming out of the presentation just so I can see your guys' reactions to these things.
I'll be honest, I don't know what an average 100 meters race lasts, you know? So it's hard for me
It's
to give an estimate.
I'd say it's less than 30 seconds. Like I don't know, 20
Yeah,
something.
Yeah,
yeah.
I would say that as well. Something close to that.
So pretty much on the money, right? But the real caveat here is Usain Bolt has spent 4 years, 4 years to reach this point to run for this medal. Yes, you can argue there's been other competitions between there, but for Usain Bolt, none of those medals really mean a thing. So realistically, he spent 4 years practicing for 30 seconds of competition, for 30 seconds to be the best in his field, in his craft, in his profession. What this shows us is the time we spend in practice is greater than time spent in competition. Now, in my experience, I know this to be true in almost every industry, every environment, and in every profession. When I was a student, I spent more time in the classroom than I spent in the exam, even though the exam was what decided my future and decided the prospects I had. I still think that is true in esports today. It's obvious. We scrim 4 times a week. We play 2 officials. We spend maybe 20 games of scrims, and we play 2 games every week in the regular season. The hours don't match up. So in my mind, I believe practice should be more important than the competition. However, I don't always feel we've reached that level across the board. So we come to that first notion of today's workshop, whereas we're going to dive into some of the science behind what happens when we do practice. So the power of practice, it shows us two things. It maps out how much time we're spending in our practice environment and how much time we're spending practicing and our performance. Now this can be mapped down to individual skills, so something like last hitting. You could even look at like aim training. You could take it down to individual skills, but you can even, when you add all the core component skills and the whole system, you could even look at it similarly there. And from here, we see this little plateauing point, and we're all very conscious of this point of diminishing returns. Typically, a lot of the players we're engaging with in esports are somewhere near this point because we're picking up players who are master plus, right? So you would assume there's a level of expertise there, and they're probably already accumulated a lot of these practice hours. The rule and the beauty of this law, it shows us that no matter the individual and no matter their innate circumstances, given enough time and given the right guidance, they can become an expert in almost any field. Now, in a vacuum, although that might be correct, in the real world, there's a lot of complexity. So, an athlete's motivations, an athlete's intention, and then the experiences within training itself will change how well someone develops proficiency and expertise.
Can I ask a couple questions, Kabir, about that slide?
Yeah,
I'm
of course.
sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. I
No,
I
no, no,
was
of course.
waiting on you to finish talking.
No, no, of course, of course.
You,
What's
if
up?
you could go back on the slide, I have a couple questions. So,
Yes.
even I want some about something you said, and the other about the power law itself. Okay,
Mhm.
so starting off with the power law itself, even though the diminishing returns are a thing, and even though if it were to like graph it out and put it as a percentage, the diminishing returns would follow this reverse curve, right?
Mhm.
So reverse exponential curve, I think it's what it's called, right?
Sure. Yeah, the
Um,
regression of that curve is the evidence of diminishing returns. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But would you consider that maybe this is a question I'm asking? The percentage points, the 1 and 2% that you gain at the end of that curve
Mhm.
would be more valuable in terms of like the competition than the previous, like for example 90%. So for example, we talk about value of certain resources in my program, and just to give you what I'm basing this on. For example, 50 HP, when your opponent's HP, taking away 50 HP has very low value. But when they're starting to get half HP and below half HP, they value, even though the absolute value is the same, or the absolute number is the same, the value of it increases, right?
Mhm.
Because of the less there is of something, more valuable it is, right?
Mhm.
So does this graph relate to how impactful each percentage point at the end of the curve is?
So to answer that question, I agree that this marginal gain in terms of raw value is really good for the athlete. And it's usually at the top level, it's these marginal gains that makes the difference between winning and losing.
Mhm.
However, given it's a marginal gain and given you've already covered 90% of that marathon,
Mhm.
achieving that marginal gain is really hard. So
Okay.
it will take a lot longer, right? You
Mhm.
will take a lot longer to go a shorter distance. And in reality, we don't only need one skill. We need a whole host of skills.
Okay.
So usually, or in my experience, if you can't if you can't map out and rationalize why we're pushing for this marginal gain, usually it's
Mhm.
not worth going past it because you're then going to lose time developing other skills.
Okay. Yeah.
Now,
So
sorry, go on.
let me just see if I understand this clear. Sorry, I don't know really how to speak a lot. I'm autistic. I'm sorry.
No, go for it, go
Um,
for it, go for it.
so if what I'm understanding is that if this graph was for a single skill, it's basically it answers the question I asked, because this graph displays only the curve of one skill, right? Of one of the many skills required to be a good league player, and so maybe in one skill you're at that like right angle point which is showing
Yeah.
the graph, but maybe for another skill you are lower down down the curve, and so you would rather waste those accumulated practice hours in another skill rather than push those marginal gains up until you are about even in every skill. Would you
Yeah,
consider that?
I like to think of it as like a skill tree, right? Like if you're playing like an MMO, like some of the newer Assassin's Creed, you have to put your skill points in
Mhm.
skill trees and get abilities, right? You
Yeah.
can max out your attack, but then you can't defend in any fights. But
Yeah. Okay.
and sometimes to progress to another band and attack, you need a prerequisite defense or a
Mhm.
prerequisite aerial skill. So I also look at it as these skills not only develop to like this level of diminishing returns, but taking
Mhm.
time to once you've reached that point of like inertia, if you go and develop another skill, this
Mhm.
skill might lose a bit of proficiency, but because you've spent time developing this other skill, you can now combine them and now you have two skills that can work
Okay.
individually and that can then synchronize. It's like if you take someone and then you make them like the best at pushing waves or the best at freezing waves, but then he doesn't know how to trade after, then
Mhm.
the value of reaching that marginal gain isn't that valuable.
Mhm.
But if you've taught him, okay, these are the conditions to freeze a wave, that's skill A. Now the skill B is how do we abuse on a freeze and how do we zone on a freeze. Now
Mhm.
you now have your fundamentals there. So now every time you freeze, you can do this. So then the marginal gains are now sinking to then give you more proficiency or more performance output. That's how I view it at
Okay.
least.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, it makes sense. And then the second question I had was more about. Let me remember the question. I actually forgot. Let me see if I can remember. No, just move on. Just move
Just
on.
move on. Sure. Let me know.
Thank
Just
you.
feel free to just jump in. That's completely fine, by the
Okay.
way.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we've all heard this phrase before. Practice makes
Mhm.
perfect. Who said it in their coaching? Who's heard it? Who believes this to be true? Just between the five of us, who believes this phrase to be true?
I'm for it, I suppose. Yeah, makes sense. can't really argue against it much.
I feel like this is where the paper you retweeted today comes in, because I feel like depends on the type of practice that you're actually doing. If you're doing any kind of productive practice, I would agree. If you're just practicing for the sake of practicing without much guidance or without much without any particular objective, I feel like it actually might hurt you because you get less rest time or sacrificing rest time, or you're even creating some bad habits.
I would agree. Mateus, any thoughts?
I'm guessing that's the way, right? I mean, I do agree a lot with what Cracky said, because I've been reading a lot about the deliberate practice. So, I mean, you could just come up to some point where you're just practicing with, like mindlessly, like practicing, and then it's just you're not really practicing, right? You're just playing a game. I guess there's a big difference there.
Lovely. I think these are very, very important things to consider, and these are definitely things I'm going to elaborate on. So originally, this phrase is inherently correct. We all understand that practice is really important, and it does help us in becoming professionals. Right? Bruce Lee, one of the biggest masters of the arts, of the martial arts, and such a good, disciplined, I would say, learner of skills, has shown that when we practice and we leverage the time spent in practice, we become really natural, we become really skillful, and it seems really autonomous in how we behave. It feels like second nature, right? Sometimes when we watch the pros, or sometimes even when we watch our players, we can see like, wow, this guy's just so natural at this. He's so good at finding a gank angle, or he's so good at managing the wave, or he's so good at peeking this corner on this map. And these are really good things. And for a lot of them, if you went and asked your players, this is how did you get to this skill? They'll say, I practiced it for a really long time. And they probably practice it more than they practiced other things. However, I believe practice makes almost perfect. Because like you guys have very rightfully alluded to, if we're spending time in the wrong places or in the wrong environments or with the wrong intentions, we will develop the wrong, not even the wrong skills, inappropriate skills. And the reason why I like to use the word appropriate and inappropriate more than right or wrong is because human performance is all about finding the right fit to the right puzzle, for the right puzzle. It's not about having the ideal technique. It's not about optimizing so that it's like to a science, because human performance is too complex. We're playing against someone else, and in solo queue, we're playing against a different person every time who wants to play the game differently, who will solve the problem differently every time. So we can't build an ideal way to play League of Legends. We can have founding principles that guide our intentions and say, I, as my League of Legends teams, likes to play like this. If I'm G2, for example, I like to play League of Legends with lane swapping. That is my identity. But that is not perfect League of Legends either way. Kraki, I feel like you have a question or an addition here.
You can very easily see when I unmute my headphones because I want to
I'm
speak.
watching. I'm watching.
So the main thing that I think really relates to how these thing that we're talking about relates to League very well is the fact that it's, so I'll give you an example. A lot of people, we involve a lot of minion aggro in realizing where minions are aggroing in my coaching, right? Which is a skill that is hard to master because at the end of the day, no one has ever figured out the exact rules for minion aggro. Minion aggro will sometimes switch and we never realize why, right? And a lot of players will ask me, oh, but do you know exactly how they would swap aggro? I'm like, no, because the more important factor is not knowing the absolute rules of it. More important factor is learning to adapt to it in a second whenever it switches. So I feel like you can teach you, there's not like you were saying, one right way to play the game, but in a lot of aspects there are ways to ideally adapt to anything that might happen. So for example, learning how to adapt your current play in case the circumstance changes, or in case the thing you predicted your opponent to do, he doesn't do it and does some other thing, learning to adapt to it so we can still come out on top, right?
Mhm.
So these adaptation skills, or like adaptive skills, are, I think, how you actually make the perfect game. It's not by playing the absolute best game, but playing always the best game at every step.
Yeah, I think that's really correct, right? I think I've sat in a lot of reviews where I hear, oh, if this guy played it this way, my play would have been correct. But it's this idea of recognizing the play has changed. Once you make a decision, they will make a decision, and once those two decisions are made, you're either where you plan to be, or you need to make a new plan. and it's the short-term windows of opportunity that we need to be very good at acknowledging and recognizing. And I think that's what makes experts really good. And I think that's the difference between Faker and Chovy. That's the difference between Chovy and an ERL1 player, and that's the difference between an ERL1 and ERL2 player, right? There are different levels, or that there are different paths of that journey of building adaptable expertise. I've written a post about it, but if it's something we as a group are very interested in, I'm more than happy to run a workshop on how we develop adaptability. How do we understand it? Because that is something I believe is very core to my principles of coaching. Is I really want athletes who are adaptable, and that doesn't mean they can play all 5 positions, but they know the upper and lower limits of their role. They know where the walls are, and they know what they need to do to put tension onto those walls. I really value that.
Would you say that not only the upper and boundary limits of the rule, but the upper and lower limits of any concept that they learn, right? So, for example, is something I value a lot, especially when dealing with concepts as minute as the concepts I talk about, which is it's not only enough to know how to create this like window that it won't create, but also learning to adapt to what if your opponent does something different. How do you still come out on top of that? How do you in a second recognize, like through pattern recognition a lot of times and habit creation? These are the two things I work with. How do you recognize that, okay, he didn't auto where I expect him to auto, or the main switch aggro? How do I now adapt to still come out on top, right? So this not only this adaptability of knowing the upper and lower limits of your role, but knowing the upper and lower limits, or how a certain concept can, how you might need to adapt a certain concept to just the concept itself, not only the rule, but the more minute things.
Yeah, like the evolution, like the butterfly effect of the decisions is being
Mhm.
like sensitive to those. Yeah, I think that's also really, really important. I think sometimes we miss it because we're so focused on being perfect. I think this is why this idea of practice makes perfect. It's a really good sentiment, but the idea that practice makes the word perfect is really flawed. I think the word perfect is one of the most flawed words in the English dictionary, especially when we talk about performance, and especially when we talk about human output. Because
Mhm.
a lot of the time, human output can never be perfect. We as humans individually are deeply flawed. Whether we like to believe it or not, we have our own limitations. And that means there will be limitations on all the works we create. Now, I believe we should only be looking, we should aim for perfection, we should chase it. And in that chase, we will find success, we will find health, we will find like the good things we need to be doing that we can consistently do. But in the thousands of games that we've collectively played and watched of League of Legends, I think maybe we've only seen 1 or 2 perfect games. There's not been a single mistake where the whole game plan from start to finish, from draft to end of the game, has gone bang 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 according to plan, and there's not been a single adjustment. So
Okay.
sometimes looking at perfect can be misleading. Now, when we look at practice, we obviously have to make some considerations. We always want to try and minimize how long we're spending on tasks, and we want to, get learn a skill, learn a skill, learn a skill. That is the human body's natural mode. We're born to learn. We're born to absorb information and take that on board. However, if we have a bad time, like if we have negative outcomes, so we're not successful at learning a task. So, for example, if I was juggling, if I wanted to learn how to juggle 3 balls and I was continuously dropping the balls, I would probably take a longer time to learn because I'm maybe more frustrated. That doesn't mean mistakes are bad, but it means it's changing my emotional reaction to the task. It's the same with the positive experiences. If I have, let's say I can juggle the ball for 3 seconds to start with at at a short repetition range, then I'm probably going to take a shorter time to learn because I'm probably going to push myself a bit faster. It's going to have a different emotional response in my brain to the task. This doesn't necessarily mean it's not always true. Again, it's a consideration because it's not always true. I've seen people who have absolutely flopped a task 5 times in a row, and then the 6th time they nail it, and they've never looked back. I've seen people manage to do things very quickly at the start, and then lose that sense, lose that feeling, lose that connection to the task, and then they go back into this very big slump and a dip. We as humans are not linear, and each journey is very different for an athlete and for each team. However, these are considerations that we as coaches should always keep in mind because it can give us more information that guides us in how we interact with the individuals, the athletes, and the teams in front of us. So coming to you here, Cracky. So deliberate practice is this idea where we want to create specific and challenging practice environments where we focus on predominantly improving an area of weakness. So this slightly darker curve here is typically what happens when we're just practicing. If I was told to just play solo queue, no coaches, no goals, just go and play, this is what would happen. I would get better up until a certain rate, and then I would just stay there, right? I get hard stuck. This is what we call being hard stuck. Um, the technical term is arrested development. It's because we're not being challenged anymore. We're not actually improving. Most of our improvement lies when we're asked to push beyond what we believe what we can do. And that's what deliberate practice allows us to do. Usually it comes in from the form of having a coach around you, having someone, maybe someone who's more knowledgeable about the skill. So for example, I'm like high emerald, low diamond at top lane. It doesn't make sense really for me to ask someone lower than me to teach me how to play top lane, unless if they're playing a champion I don't play, right? As a way to start. I would probably go to Cracky and say, hey, these are the challenges I'm facing, and Cracky would be really good at giving me some goals that would challenge me and cause me to think and explore my interaction with top lane in a different way. What this does is it elevates my level of performance. It helps me push through this invisible wall of plateau. Kind of like if you guys have ever looked at state changes, so how a solid goes to a liquid and how a liquid goes to a gas, they don't hit 0 degrees and then instantly swap. They stay at 0 degrees for a while and then it goes. They have a phase transition. Our bodies are very similar and our minds are very similar, especially when learning skills. We will hit phase transitions and then we need to challenge ourselves to push through it. What happens to a lot of people is they hit this phase transition, they go, hey, I'm good enough. And this is the issue in the statement. I am good enough. Please congratulate yourself for being good. But if you really want to be the best at what you want to do, which a lot of ERL players want to be, a lot of LEC players want to be, a lot of LPL, every true athlete wants to be the best, then you have to challenge yourself and you have to put yourself in levels of discomfort. So
If
the first,
you, if
sorry,
you,
go on.
sorry, I didn't mean
No,
to
go,
interrupt.
go, go,
Uh,
go.
so it's something that comes from my experience coaching, for example, players who are very successful. So, for example, I've gone to MSI, I've gone to Worlds, stuff like this. I think the main issue that a lot of people that try to bring in new ideas face has to do with that idea that you just brought up of being good enough. So, for example, so you might show them something and they might see the value in it, but it might be uncomfortable. And so the answer is always the same, which is what I'm doing already works. Why would I change it? Why would I try to improve on it if it's good enough, right? So how would you handle that situation? So after some situation I've always had a hard time with handling. How would you handle that situation with the background, the academic background that you have?
I think I think dealing with this challenge is more of a social challenge than
Okay.
and than a theoretical coaching challenge. I believe a lot of coaching is this social dynamic between you and the athlete.
Hmm.
So if I knew the athlete right really well, like for example, I'm going to put Daniel on the spot here because I consider him one of my closest friends in esports. And he's a player I've worked with for a while now. If Daniel said my skills are good enough, I would very simply say, do you want to be good or do you want to be great? And then I let them decide. Right?
No,
If you
okay.
want to be great, you'll trust me. Trust me in saying that this is going to help you. We'll try
Hmm.
it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you have to trust me, and we have to go outside our comfort zone. So I
Hmm.
think the next slide will help frame this. So there's a very good social constructivist theory by Vygotsky here, um, which is called the zones of proximal development. And our comfort zone is where all of us want to live. We all want to be here. It's really nice. It's really cozy. We recognize where everything is, and we know where, I know my minions are here. I know I have this much HP. I'm good. I'm chilling. But if we step a little bit out of our comfort zone, yeah, we might make more mistakes, but we're experiencing new experiences. We're learning. We're having different outcomes. We're asking to take our existing knowledge and apply it in different ways. What that does is our green zone then expands. And there's in a theoretical world, this circle could be fully green and you could be completely comfortable. In reality, that never really happens, because what a lot of people may be confused about goal setting is the point of goal setting isn't to achieve the goal. The point of goal setting is to give yourself a direction and a pathway to improve. But as soon as you get close to finishing that pathway, a lot of the times you want to move that goal to keep challenging you, to keep stretching you. Even Faker will do that. Faker doesn't go, oh, I've mastered laning, done. I'm never going to talk about laning again. He will give himself a different challenge. There was a really good, I don't know if any of you guys watch it, the Hot Wings YouTube show where all the celebrities go on and they eat hot wings with the host. I don't know if you guys ever seen that. There's a good one with Lewis Hamilton that came out recently, and the host asked him, "Is it easier to be at the front of the pack or behind, or like chasing the leader or be the leader?" And he said, "It's probably easier to chase the leader because then you have someone challenging you, and when you're at the front, there's no one there challenging you." So what he used to do is he would visualize his own car way ahead. So he's kind of like trying to catch up to where himself, and that's keeping him in this level of challenge. That's causing him to push, and achieve better results every time, every year.
Would you say that also comes to the degree of innovation? Because if you're chasing a leader, you have someone you can learn from, you can base your learning from. Whereas if you are the leader, you have to be the innovator, right? You have to come up with the new things that the other people are going to try to copy.
Yeah, I think so. I think so for sure, right? But I don't think it's that hard to innovate. I think innovation is a mixture of curiosity and creativity. I think a lot of players and a lot of coaches, and I think a lot of people, we as human beings are very creative. Creativity comes more naturally to us than curiosity. How we build curiosity is a very important question to ask. It's not a question I have a full answer to. I definitely have my thoughts, but I
Mhm.
definitely don't have an answer to what's the best way to inspire curiosity in people.
Mhm.
I believe a lot of it comes from within. Some people are just naturally curious. Some people learn that they need to be curious to stay. And in my experience, the people who don't develop curiosity get left behind.
Hey, Kabir, can I
Mhm.
put a question in?
Of course.
Could you go back one slide of the presentation?
Yeah, of course.
So the thing I want to talk about is, or like just throw the question just for all of you guys. Actually, it's mostly because in esports, I mean, as far as I know, like the main way to train is in scrims, right? So you're basically facing another team. And there's one team in Brazil here, so it's Liberty. I don't
Yeah.
know if I'm from Brazil actually, so yeah, it just and recently they actually they gave up on scrims, and I find it quite interesting because scrims are like it's hard to have actual like deliberate practice in scrims, I guess, because you're always depending on what the other team is going to do, right? So one of the arguments that they brought up is that like there was a time in Split that they wanted to train like early games.
Mhm.
So the early games like 10, 12, 15 minutes, I guess. I'm not quite sure, but so they want to train like this 10 to 15 minutes, but they had to spend a whole hour playing a whole screen with drafts and everything, and how this prevents them from like being more specific, right? So when you're playing Scream, you're basically playing the whole game, and you have a lot of things to do at the same time. And this goes from like I'm working with a Counter Strike team right now,
Mhm.
so and this is like this goes for the whole of esports community, I guess, right? And the thing I wanted to ask about and talk about is mostly like how effective or ineffective screams actually are, right? Because if you could have a system of training where you could have a more controlled environment where you could train actually the thing that like you have 5 things to train, and if you could actually do one by one during the day, it would be so much more effective as far as I understand. But I also understand that like scrims are so deep in esports culture that like the when they came out with this idea, everyone's like, they're freaking crazy, like this is stupid. What are you doing? And I am a little bit worried because like Liberty has a good like staff and they have a good structure, but in terms of competitiveness, I mean, they're not a super strong team, and what I see happen is like they're gonna do this, and they're gonna have a great result in the first split, and people are gonna say, look, like this idea is stupid, and then everything is gonna go down. But yeah, what I want to bring to discussion is like the idea of deliberate practice versus screams and how much you can create a control environment in a scream, And I don't know what you guys think about it, but I just saw this line and was thinking about all this, and I just wanted to put it out.
I'll let
Do you
I'll
want
let
to?
anyone else answer the question. Before I could talk for days about this.
I'm
But I'll
just
let
it
someone
just
else answer the
one thing-
question.
I'm gonna send here in the chat all the links about this if you guys wanna.
Yeah,
talk
please,
about.
please. I'm such a big fan of what they've done. I even quote retweeted it and said like I think this is probably one of the best things to do, like for an esports team to do.
Yeah, hey everybody. I was a bit late.
No worries.
Yeah,
Thanks
my
for
name
joining.
is Joseph. I'm from Germany. I want to answer this question, and I would start off to say that this is a flawed system that we have in esports with practice. Because if I compare it to basketball or like soccer or football, however you want to call it, you can recreate the situations, you can recreate the play, and you don't have to start a new game always to get in the specific situation, right? In shooters, sometimes you can like say, oh, we want to practice the retake, and then you just like let the enemy take one side, and then you play the retake, for example. But in League of Legends, where the team is like the Liberty Esports it's CBLOL from Brazil, as you said. League of Legends is different because you always have to start a new round every time, and then you get to the certain point. For example, Nashor take, right, where the Nashor already spawns, or like what is already, it also spawns at 20 minutes. So you have to play 20 minutes of useless practice until you play the situation out, right? And there is no sandbox mode, so we can just say, oh, the game starts at 20 minutes, everyone has 2 items, yada, yada, yada. So that is a flawed system itself. It has nothing to do with the scrims. It's a flawed system. And then on top of that comes how players will, unless they are very, and I say hardly or like very like in the coaching way, from the coaching perspective, very authority trained to just follow the orders, or the players have the natural drive or the instincts to say, okay, I'm going to use my time to practice to just like fulfill the task that I'm given by my coaching staff and by my teammates. So that's naturally not going to happen. So I wouldn't say scrims are ineffective. It's just the system in which we practice is inefficient. And then on top of that, you will face players that don't have the mindset to just execute what you want to have. And that comes a lot of times with not having the amount of time before going into season to say, okay, this is how I want us to treat scrims. Is everybody aligned on this? Because I have been in teams where I wasn't the head coach, or I came in late, and then some player was like, oh, I want to try scrims to limit test. The other player was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, why are you limit testing when you're ruining the play for other ones? When the play was, oh, we want to play Drakes, or we want to do the retake, however you want to call it in specific esports titles. And then you have already a mismatch of like vision, what's supposed to happen in the scrims. So I would say these are the 2 things that like make scrims bad, and why the state of scrims is always laughed at. And to answer your question, because I have done something like this, where it was exactly about the early game, where I was like, we are going to have different objectives for the level of teams that we are facing, right? So, for example, on Monday was a day, because the match days were on Wednesday and I think Friday back at the time, where we would say on Monday is a time where, because we had a scrim on Saturday and Sunday was off, we came off from an off day, the energy is gonna be low. People are not gonna have like the best mindset, or like they're just like still in the holiday mindset or off day mindset. So we would face a team in scrims that was from the level of play much, much lower. So we was like, okay, this is just for us to make sure we get back into the good habits of like communicating the things that we need and playing the way what we need. Because realistically, we knew we were going to stomp them in 20 minutes or 25 minutes. That was clear. Now the question was, we want to play the early game as good as possible. So the first 8 minutes, and we would only watch the first 8 minutes. Nothing else mattered to us. So that was our Monday goal. And then on Tuesday, the goal was different. So like going into intensity and to like levels of play, how you practice is very important. And to close it off, I think this is a very good thing. The question is just, are people aligned on how it should be viewed and how like the implications? Because if you then don't have like everyone on the same page and everyone is like working towards the same goal and is continuously improving, you can end up in a problematic situation where you would just rinse and repeat and go into like coping mechanisms where you would say, oh, it's fine, when in reality it's not going to fine, then you get punished on stage. So the downside of this I see is, how are they going to get like the information? And then it's like their coaching staff has to do like a tremendous job of like finding out what's the meta, right, and always be ahead of it. And the second thing is, how are they going to be like, because they are in a bubble and they don't get their outside information. So these are the two things that I see. But generally, I think it's good, and can be very, very like system breaking, I would say.
There are a couple things like about what both of you said, which is first of all, I don't feel like if you have a proficient coaching staff, scrims should be not only your only way to practice, but especially not your main way to practice. And I think a lot of that comes down to different ways to approach, but also different ways to do something which I think is very valuable, which is isolating certain concepts. So this skill, if you just play scrims, a lot of times you can to some extent give different guidances and even pause the game to give different guidances throughout the game at key points, but they become very inefficient practice for the simple reason that you can't isolate a certain concept, right? You can't isolate how do you enter the Baron pits against us or against with some or with no vision, right? And so doing stuff like drills like formation training, or doing stuff like even in 1v1s or 2v2s, which might be really just like useless practice if you isolate a certain concept and give specific tasks that I do this in my coaching, where they might not be the ideal way to play the game, but they force you to learn something. They stimulate knowledge and they stimulate growth. And so these specific exercises isolate certain concepts so that you can improve on them without necessarily having all the complexity of a full game in. And so stuff like quizzes or stuff like to stimulate theory growth, or I don't think theory sessions are good because people just spend like an hour talking to the players tune out after 15 minutes. So doing stuff like quizzes, doing stuff like isolating certain concepts both in 1v1s and 3-2s, and doing like specific drills like tower dives, or even if you are playing a scrim, if you do have an academy team, it's a lot easier, like Liberty, because again, shout out to Brazil, I'm Portuguese, I read the article. But if you do have an academy team, it's a lot easier because you can just say you do this, we'll do this, and we'll see how it pans out. But even if you are playing against a team you are not, that's not within your system, giving some guidances to the scrim to might have a bit of a barrier to entry from the enemy team to, for example, accept, for example, we're going to do a team fighting scrimmage, something we've started doing in Lua, which is like we play the first 20 minutes of the game, they can practice whatever they want. We usually do this against weaker teams who might find more value in practicing early games against us, and so we give them the normal practice. When it gets to 20 minutes, we won't just play team fight, wait for the objectives to respawn, play another team fight. And during that time, we're waiting for objectives to respawn instead of trying to play a normal game, because we're trying to isolate this concept of, for example, how do we enter into a team fight formation or different team fight formations. We just establish the gold values we want to establish for the future scenario. And this is just a way to combat the fact that outside of LPL we don't have a sandbox mode, because in LPL they do. And that's why I also think the Liberty system is quite good, because it tries to like simulate what would be a sandbox mode that they have in LPL. And this is why LPL teams have become so good at team fighting, because they can get into this scenario without the effort of having to wait 5 minutes per objective, But I feel like there are a lot of different ways in which you can make practice better that don't rely on scrims. And I feel like the over reliance on scrims, even though they can still be useful, and even though the practice in a real environment helps simulate what you do in an official, which is good, there are a lot of different ways to practice.
And just another thing, I think most of the things that Blackgator mentioned, so like regarding scouting and all of that, they actually talk about it. So I know that they have like I've been reading a lot about what they're doing. I've been watching a lot of interviews, and they talk about a lot about how their staff and their players are quite aligned with the idea. And it's interesting because most of their players they were academy players last year, if I'm not mistaken. So they are all like new and fresh, and they are open minded to that. The oldest player they have is Mikon, which he was a CBLOL winner. He played MSI, I guess, or something. But he's the only more experienced player, and I think it's interesting because actually relates to the next slide. We were talking about Vygotsky and how they all need to be like in this a little bit out of their comfort zone. So we're hoping like they're in the yellow area of the circle, right? And they do have a lot of I mean I know what they're trying to do is like they have I think 3 analysts, and one of them is mainly focused on watching other leagues and being into the meta and all of that. So I think that these are valid concerns, and as far as I know, I mean I could be completely mistaken, but as far as I know, they thought about that and they're trying to figure a way out around that.
I think everyone's hit very crucial points that scaffold the conversation around this. I think if I could just put my cherry on the top here, I think is the status quo of how we're approaching scrims now, where 50% of our practice environment is external and not controlled, is generally more harmful than beneficial. However, the challenge of having a 10-man in-house system predominantly lies on the buy-in of the players rather than the theoretical efficiency and efficacy of that practice. I can tell every player today this practicing with 10 people in the same call is significantly better than practicing against strangers halfway across the country. It's significantly better. It's more useful. You will have a better time. You will not walk away after today's training session thinking, man, what a fucking waste of 4 hours of my life. I can tell that. But I also know the second we do that practice, they're going to be like, this academy team player is fucking useless, man. But then they'll go play an external scrim, but then the external scrim player is also useless. So there's no pleasing the players. I think that the biggest challenge ultimately comes down onto the buy-in. Now, the second challenge comes down onto the resources afforded to an organization. I don't think not every organization has an academy team. Also, not an academy team that is competent enough to warrant the idea of having an in-house system. So, for those who are constrained to having to stay with the status quo, I still think there are plenty of ways for practice to be approached in deliberate manners, kind of like how Cracky said, right? We want to practice team fighting, so we're going to stay disciplined to it. I think a lot of it comes down, and I'm not going to say any names, but this is my feeling. I think a lot of coaches don't actually care about what practice looks like. I think a lot of coaches just say, hey, practice is on Monday from 7 o'clock. We're going to play 3 games against this team. Please be there 10 minutes before. They're going to say 10 minutes before, be like, okay, guys, did you play enough solo queue today? Maybe 2 players are still in a solo queue game. They're not even ready. But again, we'll come across to this discussion later on in the presentation. I think we've kind of discussed this through this conversation, how we might control the level of challenge. We've looked at some of the challenges of having to control our practice environment. And then the second principle I want us to really, really think of is purpose. What is the fucking point of turning up today? Are we turning up to maintain our skills? Are we turning up to learn something new? And are we turning up to transfer those skills? Because the purpose of our practice should identify where we go and what environment we then go to practice. If I want to learn something, I might go and do a Cracky quiz because that's probably going to help me learn something new. That's going to ask me to take theory and see which gaps of knowledge I have. If I want to maintain something, I might just go play the game because there's no real goal and objective. If I want to transfer, I need to be playing against opponents that are harder, more difficult. This is probably practice just transfer is what I would now signify to this Brazilian team and say, hey, look, this is maybe where you're going to have the most struggle. The biggest struggle is how much of your practice is going to transfer onto stage and how much of this learning is going to be on stage. Because you might be, like Jack said, optimizing to 10 people that are constant. So that level of difficulty will lower over time. So the external scrim really helps, especially if you can get like perceived better opponents. That's your like pressure test. I still think that should exist. I, in my mind, have mapped out a few areas where you might go to maintain, to learn, to transfer. I'm curious to see if you guys agree with how I've delineated this, and what else might you add to these areas of practice?
If you allow me, I think there's a misconception, and I think you've kind of fell into that misconception, which is that one specifically because I worked through this is my main coaching method, right? Which is 1v1s and 2v2s. I feel like a lot of people fall into the system of, oh, I'm just practicing to practice a meta match, but I'm just practicing to understand better this match that I might play in scrims or officials. But I feel like a lot of times 1v1s or 2v2s can be used to learn a lot. And so
course.
I coach a lot through 1v1s and 2v2s because they allow me to get a repetitive, consistent, standard environment where my players can improve in laning phase, right? And you might say, oh, but there are no junglers involved. Yes, but the point of it is not to understand fully how through 1v1s and 2v2s how a real game, how these concepts will operate in a real game. They are there for you to understand in the dead times where there is no jungle impact, where there are no roams, which might impact your lane. So a lot of these dead times that happen of like 2 minutes extension of 2 minutes where there are no objectives, there's no reason to, for example, for a mid laner to force prio and like that. How do you actually get leads? How do you generate leads through this, right? And so then once you learned how to apply the concepts and how to actually put them into practice, once we create the habits, the pattern recognition, all the skills necessary to apply them, we actually review real games and how they're applying it in real games and change and realize how does the concept change from a 1v1 to a real game. For example, if you're on weak side, how does that impact the concepts you're using in laning, right? Or if you're playing against a specific player in an official in a week, what concept would you prefer from all the list of concepts you have to play into this specific player, right? And so I feel like 1v1s and 2v2s are misconceptualized because a lot of people just use them to hop on a call with another mid laner or another bot lane or another top laner, and just play a few games, kill each other a few times, and then say, okay, that's fine. I know that I can hold in at level 3. And this I think is very misguided and useless practice. And the higher level I coach every time, I realize that a lot of people are using 1v1s and 2v2s for this exact reason, instead of having 1v1s and 2v2s where you are, for example, start off, in my case, with a diagnosis game to decide what concept we're going to talk about. You introduce the theory of the concepts, you look at practical examples, and you do correction, so that you reach a point where the player, through some homework and specific tasks, can work on their own without needing for you to always have to be monitoring them, which allows for more diversity of practice. And so I feel like that's the main thing that I noticed just from a quick view at this. But also, when you're practicing to transfer, I employ a ladder method. So for example, when you talk about concepts of laning, you have to first do them in scrims, do them in sessions to the point where you can comfortably understand how they work. You then don't go do them. So only once you understand the concept, you go do it in solo queue. Once you do understand how it works in solo queue, once you've gotten a big enough database of games in your head so you can apply it, then you try to do it in scrims. Once you are comfortably able to try it in scrims, then you try to do it in officials, right? And this is a necessary ladder that players need to climb over the course of like a week, so that the pressure that is on them to exercise these concepts well enough increases with time and with expertise that they have, so that they don't get to an official trying to do something or they get to scrims doing something that they just did in sessions and they're not confident enough yet. So then it will correlate a lot to what was in a previous slide about the negative experiences, right? They'll have a bad experience trying the concept in scrim and they will not want to try it again. This ladder for me is really important.
So, a couple points here. I agree with my presentation of the 1v2, 1v1 and the 2v2 matchup. I appreciate that. If I only silo it as practice to maintain, it's probably ineffective. I do appreciate that a lot of players are using 1v2s, 1v1s and 2v2s as a way to learn like concepts of laning or even learn new matchups, learn new champions, etc. However, when it comes to this ladder system, I agree that it is very valuable to look at it that way. However, I personally don't fully agree that it's linear in its journey. I do believe that players should have the freedom, right? I think officials should always stay at the top, because right, that's the most important thing. But I think when it comes to looking at this isolated practice environment See, remember, like one of the most important things to practice, right? So this term representativeness is basically how much does your practice environment look like the official game. Now, if I just play 1v1 30 games before I go play solo queue, I know if I play one of my best champions or if I play a champion and the same matchup 30 times, I can do the exact same thing in solo queue. But now in solo queue, that jungler is there. Now I appreciate you've covered that consideration of dead times, etc. But you need to have a healthy balance where they're able to jump between these levels of representativeness, because that's what
Mhm.
you're doing is what you're helping them is you're helping them understand the windows of opportunity in a more contextually driven manner. I think if you run the ladder in a linear fashion where they have to start at the bottom in an isolated practice and then in solo queue and then in comp, what you're doing is you're making them embed and refine their skills in non-representative ways, right?
Okay, okay.
50% of their training is now non-representative. Isolated practice is non-representative to officials. Solo queue is non-representative to officials. Even scrims, because we don't approach it with the right mindset, isn't that representative to officials. So we need to, instead of, again, I'm not saying your ladder is incorrect. I think it's great. I just think if you encourage a non-linear interaction and a non-linear journey between the first 3 steps, I think that is probably more effective and more sustainable for that transfer. It probably
Okay, I
makes it
appreciate
a
it. Yeah.
slightly easier. That would be
I
my
also think,
advice.
for example, when you say long linear is like allowing players to bounce back and forth between levels to
Yeah.
approach different levels
Yes.
of refinement.
So
I fully agree. I just didn't put it into the right words because, for example, we will have like, I don't know, one session per week with some players, and they'll do like they'll learn the concept, then they'll practice in solo queue. They come back to the session to finish off refining it. So, for example, they'll learn the basics, then they'll come back, learn more levels of complexity, then go back to solo queue, and then maybe go to scrims, right? Then if it doesn't work in scrims, they come back to sessions, which I think is the better way to explain it, and it's in reality how it normally works, right?
Mhm.
I think the ladder that I explained is more of a guideline, I would say that, which
Of
is
course.
you want to follow that kind, just like you say, it's a good principle, right? It's a guideline that you want to have where you don't want to jump 2 levels, for example, but you do want a lot of times to go down a level and go back up and down and up.
It's always, it should always be, it should never be learn, apply. It should be learn, apply, learn, apply.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah.
You can't take 3 steps with your right foot and then 1 step with
Yeah.
your left. You have to, it's right, left, right, left, right. That's how we walk.
Yeah.
I think it's very similar in learning a skill is we pick up a small piece of information, we see if it fits. Okay, it fits. Is it fitting consistently? Can I do it 99 out of 100 games? Cool. This is now in my bag. Okay, this
Yeah.
kind of fits, but I can't do it 99 out of 100 games. Maybe I'll only use it once or twice. It's my pocket skill, my pocket pick.
Mhm.
No, it's getting this understanding. But again, I do appreciate that these are very good ways to approach understanding how to help that athletic journey of that skill development. And I think it's a very good thing to be very conscious of.
Okay.
So coming to the second parts, and the next couple slides are going to be slightly more interactive. So I'm just going to drop the link for this. So I appreciate I've been speaking a little bit. So now we can all jump in here, and if we all just come up to this slide and the slide after, hopefully it lets you edit. Please let me know if it doesn't, and then I can just be the workshop scribe, which is completely fine. But what I want us to outline on this slide, we have 2 different words: play and practice. There's a reason we have 2 different words. They have different definitions. They also have different values, purposes, and emotions attached to them. What is the difference between playing and practicing? Just the only constraint I'm going to put to you is anything you want to add, just give me 1-word adjectives.
Sorry, when you say play, do you mean like in an official environment or just like a solo queue?
Playing the game. Playing the game, practicing the game. What is
Okay.
the difference between those 2 phrases?
I think first thing you would
And
say it's mindset somehow.
yeah, well, maybe if you think one lies between both, right? There's like the mindset is different. So maybe we can put mindset in the middle here. So let's say I'll just put mindset here.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay, sure.
I'll put mindset here, for example. And then what is the mindset in play and what is the mindset in practice? Just 1 word on either side of it. And, is intention purely to challenge whoever wrote intention down? Is it purely on the practice side? That's 2 words. Hey, hey, no cheating. No dashes allowed. You're muted, Cracky.
Thank you. I was speaking for a while. I for some reason can't edit. I don't know why. I
Okay,
think some
what would you
glitch
like me to
with my
put for you?
phone. Guided.
And I'm
On
assuming
the
that's on.
practice side. Yeah, on
Sure.
the practice side.
There you go. Would you? I'm very curious about this. Why is the goal of practice winning? What do we think that?
Oh yeah, I was wondering if we just discuss about do we wait? But yeah, I come from this stance because from my master thesis, at least in solo queue, people were practicing a lot in solo queue, and on the same term they wanted to win because they wanted to climb the ladder, and when they just played for fun, they they didn't really practice; they just played.
So would
that's
you
where
say?
this distinction come from. So I would say it's pretty isolated maybe on solo queue and not the practice in a like sports science sense. That's right.
But
In the realm of solo queue, at least it is.
would you say if someone's practicing in solo queue and they're playing to win, are those mutually
No,
exclusive to each other?
that it comes down to mindset in the end. So I remember people that say they say something like, "Well, I don't fucking care about my rank anymore." So my words. Um, so I would just practice new champions. I made those LP, but in the end, I practice something new in the environment that I need to practice it because on my Smurf, it's too low either to consider it practice because it was too easy anyway.
Again, like I think personally for me, I think if you put something as strong as winning, it would always have to be on the side of play because in my mind, the whole point of practice is improvement, and I don't think winning or losing ever is never a good indicator of improvement. You can play amazingly and you can lose. You can play like shit and you can win. So how do you know if learning's taken place? The outcome very rarely tells you what actually goes on in practice. And I think a lot of the reason why we struggle to achieve deliberateness in practice is because every player wants to win every scrim game. But if I told them, hey, we're going to approach this scrim today this way, so the theory that I use and something I've researched is the application of constraints. And I will tell players, hey, the first 7 minutes, we're going to play no comms. It's going to be really challenging. I really want you guys to be very aware of how you guys are behaving when you can't rely on comms to get an early game lead. And one game, this is in Prime 2, in Spinebusters, last split. We messed up a dive. Happens. You mess up a dive. Instantly in review, player goes, I'm never going no comms again because we lost the scrim because of this. But that's the issue. Practice isn't about winning or losing. It's about challenging yourself to get better. I would always disagree if you said the mindset and the goal of practice is to win. I think the mindset and the goal of play is to win, because why are you playing if you're not trying to win? Ultimately, as a competitor, If you're just a casual Andy and you're just having fun, and we all just go play arena right now, I'm having fun. I'm playing. I want to win, but I don't really care if I do or not. But if I'm playing solo queue and I'm not trying to improve at anything, I want as much LP. I want this imaginary number controls my life. You know, but it's hard to justify winning.
Yeah,
being
I
synonymous with
see your
practice.
point, and I wholeheartedly agree. But in the in the realm of goal, like what is your goal? At least in solo queue, I've seen these two outcomes related to practice and play. So and it's not a counter argument. I'm not saying that mine's right and yours wrong. Yours, I would hope that yours is more right to more people.
No,
Because in the
again,
end,
I'm not saying you're wrong, Eric. Here, that's I
no,
think
no.
maybe that's the misconception here.
Mhm. Yeah, like I hope more people can understand that practice is not about winning. Yes, of course, definitely.
Sorry, Joseph, you wanted to jump in there. Oh, I think you're muted, but twice. You're muted twice over. You don't trust the mute button on Discord.
Yeah, I don't. I think this is something that I experienced when I was started in like 2019, 2018, where the player would have a certain concept, and that comes from the flawed system of solo queue. Because when you win, you feel like you improved, but in the end of the day, you just can win. Like you can go 0-15 and you can still win the game. And if you're telling me that you practice something by going 0-15, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying the chance of it is very low, right? So you have to, and that would be a different aspect than where you have to go into the player's mindset and have to get close to the human being and understand why do they like have this thing of winning is practice. Why is that like the I don't know how I say it in English. Why is there the connection between winning and practicing so much when it shouldn't be connected so much? And then you have to find out why the person has that, and that is probably something that has to do with their socialization, how their circumstances are in life, and then you get to the point, and then this is the first thing you teach them to say, "Hey, what we have to do is we have to cut this and like have these two things as separate things, and then we can go into the practice, and this will solve a lot of issues for them, because then there will be their mental state will much be better, because then they don't see themselves as worthless whenever they lose, because they say, oh, it doesn't matter the outcome if it's like plus 20 or whatever, or minus 20. It's I came in with the goal, and that's the other thing that you have to do. You have to give them goals, because if they're just playing, then they obviously will only have the one form of feedback, and one form of feedback is you win the game or you lose the game, right? And that's where it comes from. This is a typical thing that players have that only have been exclusively to solo queue environment, or they had coaches where they didn't enforce these things, or like they didn't bring it into them and didn't get the buy-in from them. So that's what I can say to this.
I think it's really good that one of the first points we wrote down was mindset, because we'll come around to it later. But the continuum of mindset, at least in the form of practice, in the form of development, is the person in front of you ego driven or mastery driven? And usually a lot of the players who say who say we're not winning enough in scrims, so we're not improving, they come from this ego mindset where everything's about social comparison, everything's about performance all the time. And again, they're not wrong. They're allowed to be there. That's our challenge. That's our challenge as coaches, is how do we help that person there? It's a very frustrating challenge, don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, we signed up to be coaches, so we signed up to take on board this challenge. So moving on to the next slide. Stealing from other content creators like Jubilee. Practice is taken seriously. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you kind of neutral? Where do we think? Just copy this little dot here and put it down, and then we could just go around and then just have a quick debrief of our thoughts on it. And I will abstain from voting. I think Daniel's done something really good. He's like spread it out a little bit. You guys feel free to manipulate the size of the circle if you feel like it covers a range of feelings. If you feel like you're between thinks, and you're more than welcome to say. Jack, you wanna copy the circle here at the bottom?
Oh, I've got to copy the circle. Okay, 1 second.
Man, Jack's not taking this workshop seriously, guys. What's the punishment?
Send me £10. That'll show me.
Okay. So we have a nice little Black Gators just playing the diplomatic game. You know, just a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
I will add to it, and I can do a second one, right? I will give context to it.
Sounds good. How are you saying Keck no, but you're only sitting on disagree? Jack, you should be on very disagree then, no? Or strongly disagree?
I don't want to be too absolute about it, but I'm pretty close to strongly disagree. Yeah.
Why would that be? Well, we'll start with you then, as you're the most negative, let's say.
So like a lot of the intent for players is that, so if their mindset is that the quality of the scrim opponent is bad and therefore they won't be able to learn anything from it, that's what gives me the impression that they won't take the practice seriously, right? And I say that because whenever I used to practice tennis when I was younger, and for whatever reason I had to play against like a 10-year-old opponent while I was 15, right? Obviously the coach didn't really care if I slammed the ball and got it past him because I'm obviously going to beat a 10-year-old. That's no qualm there. But there's always an opportunity for me to practice my fundamentals, like, you know, where am I placing my wards, how am I manipulating the wave, and am I winning the game properly instead of just like taking advantage of my mechanical skill to just outclass him. Am I able to beat them with the fundamentals? And a lot of players just won't consider that because they feel like they're already so low level, they're just going to beat them with how fast they can spam their keys with their APM, and that's it. Which, for the teams that I've been in, indicates that the practice isn't really being taken seriously, in my opinion. I'm sure that's not the case everywhere.
Should we have one on just agree. So I guess we'll bounce back and forth on the fence. So we'll play a game of tennis here. So who's on just agree on the green dot here?
That's me.
Okay.
Like I have two because I wanted to have the distinction, right?
Sure.
Like the second bar or like the third bar is also for me. I would agree that is taken seriously because when people work with me, I enforce that practice this environment where practice is taken seriously. Because if you want to work with me, this is like basically you're signing a contract where you're saying practice has to be taken seriously because this is the way how we work. If you don't want to take it seriously, then either we have to find a solution or we just take the cut and say, hey, we will not work together because our mindsets are not aligned, right? And this is why I did the bar with disagree and agree, because from my side it's agreement, but I would see the general how it's done, and I would rather lean to the side of disagree, because a lot of teams that I even like advised or like coaches that I advised was like, okay, you don't have an alignment how practice should be run, and everyone has their different thoughts, and because everyone has their different thoughts, not everyone is doing or trying to do the same, and therefore practice is taken seriously by some and not seriously by the others, which results ultimately that practice can't be taken seriously as a whole, from the whole team perspective.
Does anyone have any different thoughts? We have someone. We have Mateos. You're feeling very positive today.
Yeah. I mean, the sun is shining, so yeah, life's good. But no, I think it should be taken seriously. I'm guessing like I went more for the ideal world, maybe not how it's actually taken, because I understand that again it could be because I do agree with Black Gator when like I mean if you don't take your practice seriously, you're just not gonna develop your skills. So you just have to do it. Like you have to put your attention in it. You have to put your focus on it. I mean taking something seriously. I mean I could go I'm a psychologist, so I could go for like the whole thing what taking seriously means to you, but I mean, I understand that for you to develop, you have to take it seriously. Otherwise, you're just playing a game in a like full automatic pilot, and you're not actually learning anything. Even if you win the game, you lose the game, it doesn't matter. You're just playing. Um, taking something serious doesn't necessarily mean you have to win it. So with practice, you don't need to win it. You need to learn. So I mean, it should be taken seriously, but I understand that after Twisted mentioned, like I understand that some players don't, and I'm not sure. Like something I was thinking about is that sometimes you have. I was actually reading one article that is written by Ismael from G2, so the psychologist, and it was recently released, and they were talking about like 10 hours of practice during the day, and I understand that that's what is usually done, but how possible is for someone to take something seriously for like 10 hours straight, because taking something seriously and putting attention in it, putting effort in it, it's very um, energy consuming. So at some point you just lose your focus. At some point you're just like not paying that much attention anymore, and that's okay because we're just humans. We're limited in some senses. But it should be regarding like, so what do you do to recharge, and how do you take your breaks, and how do you do all of that. But I mean, if practice isn't taken seriously, it doesn't matter how seriously you take the game after. It's just gonna be shit because you didn't practice. So yeah, for me, I mean, practice maybe should be even taken more serious than the actual game, because you can put some more pressure in the practice, and in the game you just want to be relaxed. So we see a lot of elite players talking about how they have fun during the game and all of that, and that takes the pressure off. So I would even say that like practice should be taken more serious than the actual competition at some sort.
No, I'm gonna call out Daniel here because, to my knowledge, he's probably the last player, or he's probably the only player here, in the call. So from your experience, Daniel, from the player's experience, and I hope you're still here. You're not like AFK. I'm not just talking for the void. What do you feel like? What do you feel like in your experience, your teammates, yourself? Was practice taken seriously? Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Do we have any other perspectives that we might not have highlighted here? Yes, Cracky.
I even though I my dot is one that's like the smallest one between neutral and agree. I was going to put neutral, but to some extent, I think practice should have some degree of seriousness. Okay, but there's different aspects of what a serious practice is that I think are very contrasting. Okay, so they contrast a lot. So, for example, you should take practice seriously in the sense that you should be deliberate in what you're doing. You should try to apply something. You should be practicing and not just playing. In that sense, it should be serious. But the main aspect that I have throughout my coaching is that it should be something that's fun, and it should be something that contrasts the degree of seriousness of reviewing games to with the fun of just chatting shit between games. And so I feel like this mix of both not only helps practice be taken less serious and not in the impact of winning and losing not being so detrimental or so impactful, or the impact being so high, but also it helps the players have a lot of fun and associate a lot of their learnings with positive experiences of just having a good time, right? And so that stimulates learning. And I think if you go towards either side of the spectrum, if you take practice too seriously, even though you might produce some better results in the short term, if something starts to go wrong, it derails very quickly. But I think to some extent, if you don't take practice serious at all and just go there to have fun purely, I feel like then it ends up not being productive the same way. So I feel like, in short, having a degree of seriousness in the sense, or in the sense of commitment to practice is good, but having a degree of fun to the point where you can associate with just having a good time while you're learning, and the contrasting of having a good time and having to be focused helps remain focused for longer. So I think it has a lot of benefits.
So to summarize, and so I'm hearing you correctly, there's a sort of line in the sand. You want players to come to practice with the right attitude, the right energy, and the right level of focus, but you don't want them to be assholes to their teammates in their practice environment. If there's a
And
mistake,
overall, I just want them to have fun.
perfect.
I
I
just
think
want
I
them
think
to have
those are great
fun
things.
especially I want them to, because I feel like this is something that I've always taken as myself and I've applied it to others, which is if I'm not having fun doing something, eventually I'm gonna, even though I might be good at doing it at first, I'm gonna start not improving. I'm gonna start like not doing it well, just my level lowering or just not improving, because it's just not something I get up from bed and I say, oh god, I'm looking forward to meeting my team in a scrim, or I'm looking forward to doing this 2v2 session or 1v1 session, right?
Your
So
motivation goes. You don't really want to come back. You don't want to do it again. Even I think
exactly. And it ends up being monotonous as well to some
Mm.
extent, because you do it so many days in a row that it just ends up being all a gray mush, because there's no separation between when you need to be serious for when you're learning and when you can just relax a little bit and have fun with your teammates.
for sure. I think those are very important considerations. I mean, I think given the nature of the conversation, I think I know the answers on the next slide. Um, but practice is effective, and I'm not saying the way practice is structured in esports. I'm saying um, when we turn
The
up to
general
practice,
concept.
the, no, well, because then everyone will say strongly agree, right? But I'm saying
Yeah.
the more times than not, we've walked away from practice thinking what we've done is useful. Like even with the constraints and the inefficiency, we still have to do our jobs. I think we can all hope for having a customizable practice tool, but I still think there's a whole host of tools we can still use, even without that. So with the means we have, do we still believe practice is effective? Smile. Cracky, can you edit now, or did you need me to do
I
it?
can.
Okay.
I've played it last time, and my one is the FG because the initials of my
Okay.
name.
Perfect. Brilliant, 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 brilliant.
It was the middle one between neutral and agree.
No,
That's
it's
my
good.
choice.
I think it's best because I might post some of these just on Twitter. I want to keep it anonymous. I don't want like
Okay.
I just I don't want 10 years down the
Yeah.
line someone's asking you like I saw this post and you said this. I don't want to be responsible for anything happening there.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think given the nature of the conversation we had earlier, we probably don't need to dive too much into it because I think we can predict. But if we can remove ourselves from the inefficiencies and the lack of tools we might have, if there's something to add, then please share. But if you think it's still just coming back down to the root cause of lack of tools and an inefficient system and culture of practice in esports, then I think it's best we continue on. Of course, Daniel, what's up? Mhm. Yeah, I would say so. I think if you believe that you're coming to practice and you're walking away feeling like you've improved, then practice is effective. Um, whether whether that practice is making you faker or not is a different question. Hmm. Does it work? Does it do its job? Is practice doing its job? That's essentially what I'm asking here. Okay, man. Like, is Jack? Are you just being negative Nelly today?
I'm not a negative Nelly. I think I'm actually being quite positive.
Okay,
Yeah,
how
that's
are you
a
being
good
positive
point.
here? How are we being positive? This is the hot take, guys. I'm clipping this, and this is like gonna go front and center on Twitter.
Okay, don't clip it. But so practice is effective. I'm not sure if I'm approaching this the right way, but if I approach the coaches at my current team and I said, how do you know the practice you have done is effective? I don't. Maybe I should do it today, but I don't know if they'd be able to answer that. At least not immediately. They'd have to go away and figure out a way to find out that their practice has been effective. In which case, I feel like the practice wasn't effective up until that moment, in my opinion. I'm sure I definitely think it can be effective. I mean, there's no doubt there. I just don't think it's being done, at least at the level I'm at, very well.
Fair. I think that would make sense. I think I would also agree that it's hard to find the. It's typically hard to measure practice effectiveness anyway. There's no real qualitative and there's qualitative ways we can do it, but there's very hard quantitative measures to measure practice effectiveness. It's hopefully one of the things I can find more information on throughout my PhD over the next 3 years. But again, it's a very hard thing. Only now have other people working in skill acquisition in traditional sports starting to quantify what practice looks like. But even then, they're finding it very hard to say this practice is objectively more effective than the other because there's so many contextual variables that really need to align for max effectiveness to be achieved. I don't know if that adds on to your question or if I'm just waffling here, but that's how I see it. And then the last point of interaction: what does quality practice look like? So, Jack, you said your coach might not be able to say it or verbalize it or acknowledge what that looks like, or if he can evaluate if today's practice was effective or not. So why don't we together, as a group of 7, 8, 9 in here, think of what does quality practice look like? What are some of the key things markers we're looking for to walk away and say, yeah, today's practice was high quality. I feel really happy with how my players were today, and I think this was really beneficial to them. I did a good job as a coach. Pat on the back, high fives all around. I can now go away and not have to think about esports for the rest of today. I can take a bit of a break because we as coaches, we work overtime a lot of the time. And I think some of it comes because players have a lot of complaints from practice. So again, same activity, maybe as a sentence, a couple words, just dot them around the page, and then we'll unpack it. While you guys do that, I'm just gonna go grab a quick glass of water. So be right back. Epiphany. This is ominous. What do we mean by epiphany?
Epiphany to me means like players having a realization that something works that they didn't think would work before the training. So, in the sense of, oh wait, we can actually play like this, or like this pick was actually a good idea.
Like that turning moment where they're like,
Exactly.
this wasn't possible. Now it is possible. That's that
Ex-
turning moment.
Exactly. So the realization that we can play a certain style or like a specific pick is actually valuable, but it doesn't come from the first thought of it. Yeah.
Okay. So quality practice, from what I'm seeing, is We know we want some good energy. There's some understanding of goals at an individual and collective level. Do the players have the tools to guide it? So do they have autonomy in their environment? Can we justify why we're practicing in the way we are? Are we aware of the negotiation process? Because again, no practice is perfect, and not every hour of practice is equal. So if 1 hour of practice in the linear world, right? And a lot of people have looked at human development this way. In the linear world, 1 hour of practice will give you 1 hour of performance gain. In reality, that's not the case. Some days 1 hour of practice will give you 1.5 performance gain. Some days it'll give you 0.6. However, it's still giving you some gain if approached correctly. I really like this idea that we have to be aware of the limitations for quality practice to be achieved. Do we have any other thoughts? What are things we might ask from players to allow quality practice to come through? What are we asking our players to bring to the practice environment?
I think the main thing, and this is something I established in the first session I do with every single player, is that I want players to bring their own opinions. And so a lot of times I will make wrong judgments on purpose so that to test, first of all, to test if the player spots that wrong judgment, because this after a few sessions, at a point where the players are comfortable speaking their own mind, because I like to emphasize that I'm their friend that casually teaches them league. I'm not their boss. I'm not above them. I'm on the same level as them. And so being able to the players, I feel like the players should bring the attitude that, or should bring the openness to give their own opinions and to give their own view on perspective on things, so that we as coaches can realize how they view things and how they feel about certain concepts, because the more I coach, the more I realize players are very emotional based creatures. And so how they feel and how they view certain concepts, so that we can change these views, alter these feelings, use these feelings to measure our practice and to change the way we're practicing so that it better fits them, and we can help change those views to, or create better habits, or unmake bad habits.
Yeah, I really like that. Do we have anything others, or do we think we've captured the essence of quality practice here?
I would just say, right, obviously, adding to that, have everyone being aligned and the concept of deliberate practice as much as is possible. And to me, that's the most important thing, that everyone at any time can express their thoughts and emotions however they want. I have had players in the past yelling at me. And if I told this to other coaches, why do you let the player yell at me? I'm like, first of all, this kid is 16, 17. So the frustrations, they don't know how to, I don't want to say humanly, but in a more adulty way to express it in a healthy way. That's the better way to say it, right? So
And
the second thing,
not to cut
yeah.
in, but it's not like, even though we're big boys, it's not like we don't get angry,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
natural.
yeah.
Like sometimes you're
Yeah.
angry, you need to give them the avenue in a healthy way, right?
Yeah, but for like younger people, it's even more right, because of development. And then the second thing is you can express any thoughts, right? And through that emotions, you then just have to know, okay, sometimes you're going overboard with the emotion, and then you have to dial a bit back and say, okay, I get it, emotional, blah, 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 speak your thoughts. And then afterwards, you take them decide to say, hey, if you have these emotions, that's correct, that's a good thing, right? Now we have to work on a way how that we don't have these outbursts. Because if everyone had these outbursts, then we're just yelling at each other, and that might not be the best environment to work in. And then they agree and then say, okay, yes. And then also they go to in front of the team and say, hey, last time I had my emotions reactions, right? And I'm trying to better myself. So everyone in the same team is like, okay, it's not okay to yell at people, but it's okay to have these emotional situations because we care so much, because normally that's the reaction to that people have. They care so much that they don't know how to express themselves. And so that is like a core principle that I have, being able to express any thoughts, whatever it might be, and emotions at every given time possible.
Yeah, I think. Would you say that aligns to this idea of psychological safety? It
Yes.
aligns to this thinking of, I don't want to feel wrong for expressing my emotions, but there's also limits to how I express them, and there's a responsibility to design and scaffold and model that behavior, saying in this environment these are our standards, these are our rules. Now and then we might break the standards, we might break the rules, and that's
Yeah.
okay because we're human. But
Yeah.
let's try and be conscious about what they are.
Yeah, I would even say the rules can like first of all they depend from team to team. With some players you can have like these strict rules. With some players you need to have like openness or like flow, whatever is possible, because they need it and that helps them express themselves in their skill in how they play. And so yeah, I would say this is kind of like psychological safety, and also that leads to them coming with any type of strategy, and not having the thoughts of, oh, my coach or my players will just laugh at me and not take it serious, when in reality it could be the next meta defining thing, or we catch up on the meta defining thing before everyone else has caught up into it. So
Or
that's why
even if it doesn't, right? Like it's even if it's I might miss the mark, but if my team's laughed at me, I'm not gonna bring ideas again.
yes,
You know,
exactly.
it's like it's that negative experience leading to a longer rates of interaction or a different
Yeah.
change. It will change everyone. So, are we happy? Are we happy here? Have I missed any points on this slide that anyone wants to elaborate on? I just want to make sure everyone has that chance to share their thoughts. I want to take silence as a no, and then that I'm happy to move on. So I'll drop back into presentation mode now. So what have I observed in the 10 years of coaching across a bunch of different sports? What I've really observed is bad players don't really care. They're just there because they're there. They have nothing better to do with their time. The average player really, really cares about competition and really cares about winning. Good players, they find value in practice. They more often than not come to practice with a healthy mindset. They always they focus on the competition. So everything they do in practice, they want it to be winning focused, as high intensity all the time. And then the best and the greatest players, they help you as a coach, they help your environment by establishing, enforcing standards surrounding the preparation. So not only practice, everything outside of it as well. Your nutrition, your review, your sleep, your social life, your rest. The great players, they care about that. Because they understand. I spend so much time in doing this, and I only spend 1 hour in competition. Remember, the observation I showed earlier was more time in practice, less time over competition. And the best players really, really embody this. So then, in my mind, our challenge as the coaches, as the performance staff, is helping each player reach their own version of good and great. Now, unfortunately, luck of the draw, we don't have infinite time, so we can't make every player great. In theory, every player can be great. We just don't have the time, nor do we have the resource to make every player great. So unfortunately, some players on the journey, we will have to make tough decisions and say, hey man, you're only good, and in the near future or for the purpose of this environment, you're not going to be great. But that's okay, because good is still beneficial. How we help take players from good or from bad to average, or how we help them progress, is help them understand mastery. We help them develop a mastery mindset, and that comes from giving them a climate and giving them an environment where mastery is valued, where the effort, the improvement, and the learnings is more important than the win or loss column. That is the fundamental crux. So what the research says is the target framework is really good in helping understand what mastery really looks like. This is what the framework looks at. So its 6 components are task, authority, recognition, the groups, evaluation, and time. For the purpose of this, task and time are very similar, and we'll come into it in a second. But let's start with task. So the task is probably the most important thing that we look at as coaches, is what are the players actually doing? Are we asking the players to explore something? Or are we asking them to execute something? That is the fundamental, that is the first question we should ask before we even approach practice. When we sit down and say, hey, practice is tomorrow, what do I want them to practice, is the first question that we always ask. Now, once we design that task, wherever we lie on this continuum, wherever we lie on this scale, that is context dependent, depending on your goals and depending on your circumstances, you don't always want to be exploring, but you also don't always want to be executing. There's a healthy balance, which is dependent team by team. Now, once we've identified the task, how we help mastery is we tell the players what I'm looking for is I want you to come to practice today with a lot of effort and a lot of energy. I want you guys to be making well thought out, rationalized decisions. I don't want you just chucking shit at the wall and seeing what works. Unless if that's the point. Unless if it's like a completely new meta and we just need to try a bunch of different things and really, really cook, then it aligns. A great way to help mastery is to give smaller goals that highlight desirable behavior. So, for example, what are some common session intentions that we might apply in scrims? Like, say, hey, today's goal is this in scrims. Chuck me out a couple.
Objective setup.
Objective setup. So then, what's a small goal that you might use to help them focus on the task, to help them really, really engage with the task and master that task? If we're talking objective setups.
It's reset behavior, communicational reset, and then depending on the individual roles, other small stuff.
And we might say, right, a big thing is 1 minute 30 before Dragon, you want to call it out. You want to organize it. That's a small goal that helps them and draws their attention towards Dragons. Now, I would also say, I think 1 minute 30, there's no objective evidence. I think it's the most logical marker to use. But why don't we try giving them an incentive to stay? If you call it out 1 minute 30 before, you get 1 point. Or if you don't call it out, so I've done it before in a team well before I got onto like esports properly. I said if we called it out 1 minute 30, the whole team can go to Dragon. If you only call it out 1 minute, only the jungler can go and do the objective on Dragons. It's this risk versus reward. We're not paying attention as a team, so it's harder to take this objective. It's not as it's because we're not coming with the right setup. So sure, you can take this Dragon because it's free, but we're not practiced the skill anyway. So it should be different. I think I don't know, maybe it's not the most effective way to practice. It's just how I've approached it. I'm curious to ask, do you guys use similar methods when breaking down the session intention to ensure there's more adherence to that so you get higher quality?
I do. I want to first ask you a question and ask a question. Am I allowed to, Kabi?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So I don't use goals in my own coaching. I don't use a goal centric approach, but I use a task centric approach, right? I've said this multiple times in this, which is I'll sometimes set a task, especially when we're talking about creating good habits and talking about the minutes of adaptability and doing like very small stuff which we do in laning, right? If we take laning to the absolute level, which I do, I don't find that goals can sometimes be useful. For example, a goal I give as part of homework for after first section is try to get the first hit on your opponent. Doesn't mean you'll be the first to see it, but it means you'll get if you farm from safe and then you hit, or he farms first and you hit, right? It's a very simple goal. But I feel like oftentimes specific tasks or a specific instruction to do this specific instruction stimulates development more than applying a risk versus reward, because if you set a specific task which is simple to follow, and even though it might not be the ideal way to play, it forces the player to do a certain thing, or a combination of tasks which force the player to play in a certain way, then they're naturally, if they follow those one or two tasks, they're naturally going to improve their level because they are forced to learn the concepts. For example, when we talk about getting hits on opponents on CS, to simplify a lot of what I do, to put it in a very, very simple way, just saying you can only poke your opponent on CS. That's the first task, and then the second task being the task I told, where you try to get the first hit on your opponent every time. This forces first the restriction of you can't really poke up, you can't really cheat this by getting the first hit before any minions die. But also the second part forces you to learn to create these opportunities, something I work with, right? So how to take minions in different ways so that these windows happen, right? And so putting these specific tasks instead of goals, I think stimulates growth a lot more depending on the type of task you're employing. This is my answer to your question. And then my question that I want to ask is related to one of the first slides that you showed, that power law that you showed. Would you say that this slide that you just showed about how to develop the tasks, how does it relate to teaching someone who's lower on the power curve compared to those final percentage that we were talking about when we first introduced this? I don't know if you remember. I was asking about the value of those final percentages. So how does this task oriented or this target method, specifically the task, change from someone who's lower on the power curve, someone who's higher on the power curve?
So the important part, and I think this is a really, really good question, and you've actually kind of caught me on the off foot here because no one's actually asked me this question before. So when we look at this power curve, and if someone's, let's say, you got, let's get some shapes in here, just for illustration purposes. Excuse me. Okay, so you got little Timmy down here, right?
Mhm.
And then you got Cracky's A-star student up here. So what we do is both. So when we look at the task itself, right? You probably the value for Cracky's A-star student who's here is you want to give him tasks that are more exploratory because he knows how to execute. He already knows what's the best thing to do. Now he needs to. Now for him, there's more value in understanding everything that doesn't work. So let's say there's 5 ways that he can get the first hit on the opponent. There's 95 ways that don't work, for example.
Yeah.
Now, in the exploration of the 95 ways that doesn't work, he might find 4 other ways that could work, that aren't guaranteed to work, but are niche solutions. So you want him to explore. And now for little Timmy, because there's so much to cover and there's so much known information, you probably can just get him to execute.
Okay.
And that's how you would balance it.
Okay.
And
Because I feel like at the same time, sorry, finish what
No,
you were
go,
saying.
go,
I
go.
thought you were done, Kabir.
No, of course,
I
of
feel
course,
like
go.
there's a very big misconception that like even LEC players are experts at their job, when in reality they disregard a lot of aspects of the game in favor of ones that might be easier to practice or might yield better results, right? This coming from someone who's one of my players recently won new masters. I've coached plenty of MSI, world players, stuff like this. And the thing is, unless you're going to the very top of the people that are experts in this concept, for example, laning phase, you'd go to Chovy, right? And Chovy, maybe I watch a VOD of Chovy and I can only spot 1 or 2 mistakes. But if I go to a VOD of an IC player, I can apply my concepts, show a lot of mistakes, right? And so I feel like when we're talking about when we're talking about this general apex, I feel like we're misunderstanding each other of what the top of that curve looks like, if it's an LEC player or if it's Chovy, right? And I feel like even in players who are LEC or are worlds players or stuff like this, according to my experience, there's a lot of teaching to be done when it comes to any phase because it is often a disregarded aspect of the game, right? It's something that most players, especially for example, you can't tell mid laners to learn to play the game in the like from season 11 backwards, that they learn to just once they have lost chapter, you spam all abilities on wave and you get out of lane, right? And this is what most people learn to play. And even after the main change, while this is not ideal 100% of the time, this is what they'll default to. And this is why lane phase is such an ignored aspect of the game, right? So to summarize this all, I feel like the apex of that curve is a lot higher than what people usually judge it to be, especially with what you said, that more of it would be exploratory. Whereas I feel like the apex of that curve should be exploratory, yes, but it's a very limited amount of people who are in that apex curve.
So
The apex of the curve.
if you notice the curves, right? So let's say this is just for A skill. Now, if you take the whole player, the guy who's just doing the same thing, the same laning phase, and is neglecting and all he's doing is just executing,
Mhm.
he'll get hard stuck.
Yeah.
He might
okay.
be hard. He might be hard stuck LEC, but he's still hard stuck. You know, a hard stuck is hard stuck. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you get hard stuck. You're still hard stuck, right? We always consider hard stuck as a thing of, oh, you're just a low elo piss low player, but you can be hard stuck
It just
ERL1.
means
You
you're
could be hard
stuck
stuck.
at the level.
Yeah, you're not going up. Now,
Okay.
you can say, well, what about Faker? He's at the top. Is he hard stuck? Well, no, he can't. There's no more up to go, right? Like
Okay.
he can only go down. So for him,
Yeah.
he wants to be hard stuck because if he doesn't be hard stuck, that means he's going downwards. That's what happened, right? That's what happened this year in MSI. You could say he's no longer hard stuck because he went down in some form of performance.
Mhm.
So do you feel like I've answered your question there? Do you feel like you're clear?
You did. I feel like the
Perfect.
difference between how much exploration, how much execution would be in different types of players fully answered my question. But also at the same time, I feel like the answer I gave to your question of, I feel like to practice certain skills, goal-oriented or risk versus reward approaches are less advised than specific tasks which stimulate, not artificially, but
Hu-
stimulate growth in an unintuitive way.
100% agree. 100% agree. I think manipulating the task constraint like you've done, right? What you've done is give them constraints in the laning phase. Hey, you can only auto attack them when they're going for a minion, and you're looking, and the outcome we're looking for is that you want to have more positive trades than they do. And what you could do is you could just do, I'm sure you're doing this, and I'm probably just preaching to the choir. You probably, I'd call it lane state fencing, and first person to get 5 hits on a minion, trading a minion for HP, first one to 5 points wins that scrim. Now we reset, do it with different champions, and then you can manipulate the I'm just cooking off the top of my head, right? Like again, not saying it's effective or not. Just you could approach practice that way, and that's amazing. If I saw more coaches do that, I wouldn't need to make this Discord server. If more coaches were doing this, I can go holiday, man. I can go work somewhere else. I don't need to do a PhD in esports coaching. But unfortunately, there's not enough, right? There's not enough of this thinking going around.
Sorry for delaying your presentation so often.
No, man. This is so good. This is so good. This is why it's a workshop. If I wanted to just speak, I would have made a YouTube video, and then if I just wanted to say that. But the reason why I value workshops is there's so much learning when I can hear from your experiences, hear from your, because even I'm still figuring things out. I can't say this is objectively true. I'm still trying to get better at what I do. I'm just very privileged in the sense that I've got to spend 5 years studying sports coaching to the science, research it, publish papers on it. I'm just very privileged in that sense. But I don't have an understanding of League of Legends like most of you guys in this call would, or to the games. I'm fucking useless at the games, but I'm good at understanding what a good coach looks like. That's what I can do.
Exactly.
So the second part of the target framework is authority. And I don't like the word authority, so I always look at it as autonomy. And I always try to ask is, when was the last time you rocked up the training and asked the players what they wanted to do? Like we talked about, fun is really important for quality practice. And I always recommend coaches saying, every time you reach practice, you should have 2 goals that you think the team should work on, and you should ask your players what they want to work on. Because oftentimes you can then judge whether we're on the same page as coaching staff and team, but then also they might give you an idea of saying, hey, we should focus on this that you might have not thought of. And if you can show your players, like, I'm willing to train in the areas you want to, you're giving them decision-making power. You're going to increase their motivation. They're going to feel more motivated in that immediate session. So they're going to give you more effort, more engagement, and they'll walk away thinking that training was more effective. And what happens is, because you've shown you're willing to work with the players in the ways they want to improve, it will feed back in. The next time they come to training, they'll come with good ideas. They'll come more motivated, even if it's not their idea, because they know you're willing to listen. It's as simple as that. Part of including them in this practice design process and co-designing that practice environment with them really helps enforce mastery. It's really hard to want to become a master at something when you're told what to do all the time. Now, I appreciate sometimes you have to make more often than not, you as the coach will be the decision maker, and you will say we're going to focus on this. But it's always beneficial, and it very rarely does harm by asking your players where they want to spend their time. Any questions? Any thoughts? Any elaborations? Any things that you guys might have tried to help give your players some authority, or what are some challenges in giving your players authority?
I would come from my experience and then would go to challenges. Actually, the challenge is easier to do. Challenges would be some people would, it depends on player to player, would then go away from something because it's very uncomfortable to go through these practice regimes and saying this is what we actually have to do, and it's really, really hard because everyone has to do their individual best, so the whole thing comes together, right? And then for some players, they are already ahead and they're doing what is asked of them, and the other ones are behind in certain ways. So that can be a challenge. And from my experience, and this has to do because I do, especially when I was in full-time teams or teams where the players would be full-time, I would have daily sessions, or it wouldn't have to be me, but one of the coaches, one of the staff members would talk to the player and kind of have a short feedback session where we would talk about what's their mental state, what they currently want, where their level of thinking is, and what they're struggling, where they're good. And that would also, a question would also be, hey, what do you think is going great in the team, and what do you think we need to improve on? All right, so that's already the intake of this, because then I don't have to permanently ask every scrim session. I already have the feedback after the scrim or before the scrim, where I know, okay, yes, I forgot about this point, or we as a collective forgot about this thing. So when you don't do this daily or weekly, or when you don't do this daily intake of getting feedback from the players, then I think this could be a very, very good thing to do, to say, hey, this is the presentation for this scrim block. This is what we want to improve on. Is there something else you might miss, right? And then that you feel like is very important based on last practices, yada, yada, yada. But I think generally this is a very, very effective way to get buy-in from your players, because then they feel like, oh, there's not this clear level of authority where it's I'm up here because I'm the coach and you are down there because you are the player, right? It brings it more to something like this, and the buy-in is, no matter what best technique of coaching you have, if you don't get your players to buy in, it will be fucking useless, right?
Buy-in is at the core of your practice.
It will be useless, right? So this is a very good thing to do, I feel like.
Perfect. So then once we've done this, the next best thing to do is to recognize the good things that happen. Is to really sit down and recognize them. Ways I might do it is I love making highlight reels or having a play of the game. I love doing in even if it's a 5-game scrim block, after every game you should ask your players, what was the best play you or your teammate made? Show us. This really helps build this sense of companionship, this camaraderie in your training environment, which helps your players want to push each other to be better. A lot of improvement in a team doesn't come from the coach to athlete interaction, but it comes from that teammate level interaction. I also feel sometimes we're lacking in good teammates. We have a lot of good players in esports, but we lack good teammates. They don't understand what that means. A lot of the times I really emphasize to my players, hey, you should tell your teammate, you should tell your brother, you should tell your jungle, you should tell your support, because these are the guys you're going to fight with when it's finals time. So you tell them, hey, I really like the intention. Even if the play went wrong, say, I really like the idea. Go tell them. What stops you? Yeah, it means you have to show your emotions as a human, but do it. It'll make them feel good. And then the next time they do something wrong, it's easier for you to criticize them because you've already told them so many good things. So if you only tell them bad things, they're just going to look at you as the bad guy. And if you're saying, oh my god, jungler, why aren't you ganking bot lane? And that's every scrim, you're just saying that every time. He's not actually going to gank bot lane more. Or when he is, he doesn't actually want to, and he's only doing it because he knows you're going to complain. That's not an environment you want to be in. That's what happens when we're just ego focused and performance focused. When we're mastery focused, we don't necessarily tunnel on the outcome, but we say, hey, nice effort. I really like the idea, but it didn't work out. How do we make it work? Then I really like breaking down our team into smaller groups. And I really wish we weren't in this position of only having 5 players, because it makes it easier to achieve grouping. But I really like breaking down, even with 5 players. What I have done in previous teams where I'm not the head coach, I would get the head coach involved, and we would do 3v3s at different points of the split, and we'd have team A, team B, and we'd have a running order, and basically they'd be fixed for the splits, and we could do competitions in League of Legends, so like a 3v3. We did skill shot dodgeball, and basically the only rule is it's like Mundo dodgeball, but you can pick any champion that has a skill shot. And we had people playing Blitzcrank as well, but it's like we're playing it and we were giving points, and it's a nice social activity to get players to bond together. Mastery is not just about in-game stuff, but at least in a team environment, mastery comes from that social connection. The best teams often look like they have the 5 best players in each role, and it's very easy to say that, oh yeah, SKT is winning because Zeus is just the best top laner and Owner is the best jungler. Sure, they might be, but they're also the best at working with each other. And that comes when we recognize the small groups. When we praise Keria and Gumayusi for being the best bot lane duo in LPL, that helps create that identity. How can we get one of the most fun things I've done is get other laners play against my bot lane. So get the mid jungle, go 2v2 against the bot lane and challenge them. Give them off meta things. What that does is it helps build that bond. It helps build that mastery and an understanding of each other. And I really like taking away from we only need to be a 5-man unit where everyone's winning lanes. What does it mean to just be a bot lane duo? What does it mean to be the mid jungle? Sorry, top laner, you're just by yourself. But you can just hang out in the corner of top lane, you know. But these small units within the team is equally as valuable as the big whole team, and emphasizing that development is really important to me. Now, I think one of the most important points is how we evaluate performance, and we've talked about it a lot. But what does a typical VOD review in esports look like?
If you ask me what the typical VOD review looks like, I would say just someone reviewing a game that's already happened, which you can't change. If you tell me what a VOD review looks like from me or anyone that I'm working with, it looks like reviewing a goal or reviewing a concept that was established previously and reviewing how it's being applied and reviewing how it can be changed. And a lot of times it can involve corrections, it can involve it can involve speculation, so speculating different scenarios to give better examples. And it can involve it's focused on certain aspects and not diffuse, which I think is a very key point. And also, so it's guided, it's principle related, it's concept related, and it's not diffuse, it's specific to a specific task.
I would agree. I would agree that that's a pretty healthy way to go to a VOD review, and I would also agree that a lot of VOD review is just watching over the last game, and to steal a different quote from the same paper that Mateus mentioned earlier. And if you guys are interested, I have the paper on my desktop. I can upload that onto the server for everyone to read if you guys haven't already. But most review is just focusing on the negatives, on what went wrong. That is extremely taxing for a player. Extremely. Especially for the players who aren't involved in the mistake. And oftentimes, the mistake isn't aligned to the goal of the training. So I would argue that if we're only reviewing mistakes, if the mistakes that we're reviewing aren't aligned to the session intention, and we're spending a lot of time when it doesn't apply to the whole group, that evaluation process isn't that useful. I would say our evaluation is probably poor, bad, maybe slightly fair. Because I understand it's our human nature to look at the mistakes. It's human nature to do that. Right? We want to. It's very like I can get 100 good comments, one bad comment. I'll think about that. We can play a game of 5. We can do a scrim block of 5 games. We can win the first 4 games, 20 minutes, and if we lose the last game, players will feel unhappy of that scrim block. It's natural. That's a natural instinct. We need to help move away from that notion, however way we see fit, and to match. We need to understand and help educate our players in that. So that comes from this idea of, one, if we're only reviewing negative things, and that's the status quo, what it does, it means players don't always feel comfortable making mistakes because they know it's going to just get reviewed. And secondly, how do we move away from just using, and a lot of coaches, and I'm sure that the ones here don't, but how do we move away from only reviewing the negative and only giving corrective feedback? And by corrective feedback, I say, don't do this. You need to do X. You need to do that. How do we break away from giving them the answer to helping them discover their own answers?
Can you repeat that? The question that you asked, so I can hear it again.
Yeah. So the question was, how do we break away from giving them the answer to helping them discover the answer?
If I'm allowed to speak again, I guess I do a lot of, especially in later sessions after you do all the part where you're teaching them stuff. I like to highlight different options. So I don't like to say this is the best play because I'm not a fan of absolute truths in league in general. So there's not one correct play. It just depends on what's the play that you want to do after that. How does your play contextualize into what's been in the past and what you want, especially what you want to do in the future? Because even from the most minute, like which mean do you auto attack, to the biggest, what objectives are you contesting, there are several options which you will have, and it will just depend on what you want to do next. So you can auto this mean or that one, both lead to a different scenario, but one is not specifically more often not better than the other. Maybe one is more fail proof, maybe one is more risky, might be more high reward, more low reward, maybe one gives you more time or less time to execute, but they're all just different. It just depends on what's the plan on what to do after it. It requires this skill of planning ahead.
I would jump into that and would say, right, the option giving the players, first of all, I would do that through questioning, right? Is what is your intention behind what you're doing? And you have to question yourself why you're doing certain things, right? If you have a decision between hitting the tower for a turret plate, moving bot, or recalling, right? All 3 things can be valid, right? Just it's kind of like a skill tree, I would say, when you play like Assassin's Creed, right? When you take the assassination point, right? Then obviously your assassinations will be better, which would be like, oh, you get the gold, you go, you just influx your cash, right? You go to roam your bot, would be helping the teammates by, or like getting utilitarian stuff, or basing for the power spikes, so you can make sure when you come back to the lane, you can just kill outright the opponent, right? And you have to understand what my actions, to what will it lead, and why do I want it to lead that way, right? So this is how I normally do it. And also about the helping understand from the positive way is like just the most thing that I do is like taking like an example from the last scrim block or for the last training block and say, okay, this is how we did it before. This is already what we are doing good. So they always have the image of like, oh, I have the capability of doing this because I did it before. So it won't be a new thing to me to do. I just have to like go on the ladder of mastery a bit higher, right? So it's very, very clear to them, I'm capable of doing this. I have done it before, so it's not a new thing, and it will give them a lot of positive. They will be able to self-talk themselves and say, okay, I'm able to do that, and therefore the chances of them being able to execute it will be much, much higher.
I really like that. I really like showing them the options and then letting them discuss what they feel is the best. And then you can obviously give your input, right? But ultimately, it's them playing the game. I think there's very little value in just telling them what to do because they might be able to do it the next attempt. But remember, we can't talk to them when they're playing on stage. And they need to feel confident, comfortable, prepared to be able to evaluate all the options and then make a judgment call. I think there's a nice little paragraph from this book I'm reading which I would recommend to pretty much everyone. I've just put it in the chat here, and it talks about how we can look at mistakes. It's just uploading now. I think it's really, really important that, and I really wish I read this book earlier, but I think moving forward, I would always explain the role of mistakes this way and show athletes the two like mistakes are really important in our learning journey. It's almost one of the most important things in our learning journey. But the type of mistake we make is also really important, and being able to minimize some of them is really crucial in ensuring we're getting quality practice. I really resonate with this paragraph. And for those who want the book, it's called "Expert: Understanding the Path to Mastery" by Roger Kneebone. It's on the Notion in my reading list, but I can put it here as well. I think it's one of, from everything I've read, from every research paper, from every book I've read about learning and development, I think this is probably the best thing I've ever read around it. So I would highly recommend it for everyone here. And then, just before we get onto the final slide, I want to thank everyone who's come here, because you've been very patient. It's been two hours and 15 minutes of a really, really engaging conversation. So I'm very happy. So the final slide is time. And over here, I want to set you guys a challenge. Next time you go to scrims and the next time you're training, I just want you guys to pull out a stopwatch and ask yourself, how long did this review last? And how long did we engage in playing the game? There's always a good rule. So when I grew up and when I learned about coaching, time on task is one of the most important things. Players zone the fuck out if a review goes on for too long. And a rule that I experimented with other coaches, as I told them, okay, whatever the game time is, take 30% of game time, and that's your review time. So if the game lasts 30 minutes, you get 6 minutes to review. If the game lasts 40 minutes, you have 12 minutes to review. Now, maybe that doesn't align with how much content can be covered, but I also believe that the in-between game review should not be extensive. I do think we are missing this big opportunity of, if we review every game in minute detail between games, that next game we play in will be less energy. So if we use this rule of 30%, there's a healthier balance, and this is an arbitrary number. The number would be depending on how you feel comfortable coaching. I like 30% as a number. It makes sense to me. But for what I see is, even in a 20-minute game, they have 6 minutes to review it. Every player is now thinking of the most important point to review, and we're not just reviewing for the sake of reviewing. And if there really is a point to review, I encourage them to bring it back at the end of scrims. At the end of scrims, instead of saying, "Oh, see you later, go off, I'm going to go play solo queue now for 20 games," I want to sit down and I want to recap, I want to debrief this scrim, and we can go over mistakes that, or points of conversation that we didn't cover. And a lot of the times, these low impact review points are just emotional review points because the outcome was incorrect. And I don't want to review those emotional review points right after the game, because it's going to be irrational, the discussion that we take. We're not going to dissect that situation properly to the frameworks we have as a coach. Joseph, I see you want to, your face lit up, so.
I want to jump into that. First of all, the emotional thing, right? What I would do is I would ask the player the question, if this is really important to you right now, it seems like it's super important to you and you need to talk about that point, then you can write it down, like depending on where we are in the conversation, and like this, not conversation, but the
Review.
situation where we are connected, right? So depending on how well I know them, right? If I know them well, I will tell them, if it's really important to you, then we can talk about it after the scrim block, right? When we close off the scrim. And if I don't know them, I'll say, hey, I will ask you after the scrim block if it's still relevant. And if it's still relevant, then we will talk about it. Then
Are
because
you
it
still
then
upset now? Yeah.
Yeah,
Are you still
right.
upset?
And most of the times the players will not be like not even want to talk about it because they will say, yeah, it's just irrelevant, I was just emotional. And sometimes I would also say, okay, if you want to speak about this point, delay it until the next day, right? Write it down, delay it until the next day, and see how you're waking up with it, right? And if you still are upset about it, then it's probably something where we have to deep dive why the situation happened, and then we can like see and learn from this, and even might be finding out some game breaking stuff or a game breaking situation in the team environment, right? But yeah, this is mostly what I do to show them, okay, it's okay to be emotional, but sometimes you just have to take the focus away from it, and then a few seconds later, once you're like calm and collected, or more grounded, then it's not really a thing. The other thing I wanted to mention about the review is obviously it depends on what level you play on, because if you play like Div 3 and lower, people, like if you do like longer than 8 minutes review, people will come for your neck, right? But in ARLs, like sometimes you have to, I like to have like a maximum of 10 minutes, right? Because most of the times there's like 20 minutes in between the game, and then 10 minutes, and then 3 minutes for every player to review their laning phase, and then the rest of it is break and quick, like okay,
Get
what's
into the
going to be
next
draft?
lobby.
Yeah,
next
yeah,
lobby, next
draft
draft.
adaptation, stuff like this, right? So this is how I like to do it. But obviously, this depends on the level where you're at. But I think 30%, 35%, I could see that.
I really like this. I really like the first point you said of like coming back to it. I used to have a player last year. Almost after every scrim, without fail, I'm getting an essay about everything that went wrong, without fail. And this is when I used to live in India. So this is like scrims would end at like 3-4 o'clock in the morning for me. I'm fucking exhausted. So I would tell him, I would literally react to the message, and next morning I would ask him, "Do you still feel the same?" And he'd go, not really. I understand why this happened, but I'm still upset about this." I'm like, cool, that's what you're upset about. So then he realized, instead of messaging Kabir an essay, every time after scrim, let me wait, let me think, and then I'll give him the real issue that I'm actually upset about. And then it made my life a lot easier. It made his life a lot easier. He was less stressed out, and then he could accept the mistakes made by his peers. I have, as much as I probably should have told him, and maybe it was wrong for me not to tell him. I do think he was the best player on the team, but I think the way he assumed that role of being the best player on the team was incorrect. And sometimes he felt everyone needed to be on his level. I think he should have also sometimes said, maybe I need to come down to theirs and see where they're at and meet halfway. I think meeting halfway as coach to player or player to player or researcher to coach is one of the best ways to actually make forward progress. What's the middle ground here? The middle ground is usually where the biggest fruit lies, in my opinion.
May I add a counterpoint to what you
Sure.
said?
Sure.
So I feel like the 30% mark or 35 or even to some extent 40% is a very healthy dose, especially if you're doing a VOD review correctly, if you're concise in what you want to say, if you're concept driven, and if you are not diffuse. I feel like that's more than enough to review what's the intention of this block and how are we applying it. I feel like it's more than enough. I do feel like in terms of shorter practices, in terms of shorter game time practices, I feel like this doesn't apply at all. So a lot of people, if you were to apply this to like even blitz scrims, but even more importantly to 1v2 sparring sessions, a lot of people have this idea that if you're playing 5 minutes of game, you have 3 minutes to review, and then you have to go into another game. If you're playing with people who are not having the review benefit them and are just waiting for you to play, they will not give you time to review, because again, like we talked about previously, most of them view 1v1s and 2v2s as this thing that you just spam and you play a few games and then okay, I can only win at level 3, right? But when trying to actually create knowledge and infuse the players with some knowledge and actually have applied all of these concepts that we've been talking about so far, you have to take longer than even double the duration of the game. If you're playing a 5-minute game, sometimes you'll need 15 minutes to review, not because you are reviewing every angle of how they could have played. You're not talking about every concept because you're isolating this specific concept, because you're isolating this specific idea. You will need more time to review several instances where they could have applied so that you can make meaningful corrections.
Just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, I agree that in the shorter forms of practice, you're probably going to have longer reviews than the practice game itself.
Mhm.
However, if that's the case, you should be doing 3, 4, 5 practices before a review comes in. So if you're doing 1v1s, so hear me out. I appreciate that you're diving very deep into the nuances of a concept. However, if you let's say you let them play 5 minutes and then they're sat down for 15 minutes, then obviously the next 5 minutes will look better. But what if you give them 5 minutes, the task is complete, and you just say, boom, go back straight into the task? Can they figure out? Can they recognize it? Why are you jumping in so quickly? Let them play 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then take 30% of that 30 minutes and say, over the 5 games we've played, what are the key points? In game 1, this was the key concept that we didn't manipulate. You managed to not make that same mistake, but you made a different mistake here. You're now not appreciating this part of the concept. So now you have 30 minutes of data, and you still have 10-minute review, and that's still 30%. I think it becomes healthier instead of doing short practice, long review. And not always, obviously, if they're making a big mistake that you think is going to limit the next attempt, then feel free to jump in. But if you think it's just a small mistake, I would always give them the benefit of the doubt to say, can they do it again next time? Because our performance game to game is too variable. So over 3 games, are they applying the general concept correctly? Then I'll review. That's how I would approach it. But again, I'm not a positional coach, so I don't have the most experience running the setup.
I can give you my
I
perspective
can
on it.
see. Can I just answer Kabir Gator just quickly, just so I don't lose what he said?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
quickly. It's because I tend to
Yeah,
forget
go ahead,
things.
go ahead, go ahead.
So I can exactly see what you're saying. I do employ back-to-back 1v1s and 3-2s often, okay? Especially when I feel like the players just need more practice, just need a bigger database, just need to try it again. But that also comes to how the players are feeling on a certain concept. But a lot of the times, I feel like as long as you're doing an interactive review and as long as you're keeping the players interested, and especially when you're trying to isolate a certain concept, it's detrimental to not do reviews between games for a simple fact that they will repeat the same mistake over and over again because you are trying to isolate this specific concept with these specific tasks, and if you don't correct how they're applying it, they're not going to figure it out on their own, you know. And this is the difference between, I feel like a lot of times you could just do back-to-back games and then review at the end, or just say, oh, let's play again, give some brief feedback to say, oh, change how you're playing this just in this slight way, and then try again. I feel like that has a lot of merit, but I feel like especially in the first interaction with the concept, or in the first few times you're trying it out, you do need the bigger corrections, you do need the more examples, you do need to get like a bigger overview of of how the concept works, so that when you understand how it works, you can just practice and practice and practice without much review, because you now understand how it works.
I agree. I personally would still approach it in the sense of, if there's like a big mistake, or if they're making like a repetitive mistake and it's an easy fix, instead of pulling them out the game, hey, quick pause, quick little bit of information, and I wouldn't even give them corrective feedback. I'll just say, can you consider or consider this, and what does this mean in this concept? That's it. I wouldn't even say you need to be doing this. I would just say, here's the dose, and I want to see, can they immediately add that to their problem solving? If they can't, then when we set out and when they're not focused on pressing the keys and looking at the screen, and they can kind of lean back and listen to you and watch your screen, then I can jump in and dive into the science and the arts of the concept. That's more than fine. That's how I would approach it. But I still think the way you've articulated your approach is a very healthy way, and I see a good merit in it.
Okay,
So-
I appreciate the feedback.
So the way I would do it is, for example, it would be the same matchup, right? Let's say Lucian now versus I don't know, right? Whatever.
Sorry,
you wanna-
Lulu.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, much fun this matchup, right? Anyways, so what I would do is like I would let them play it out, and I wouldn't like say first time and then we cut. I would say play it, and then I would at least give them a second time to play without feedback, because most of the times what happens is, and that's also part of my coaching philosophy, I want my players, basically the whole part of my coaching philosophy, I want my players to not need me, because that means that I have trained them in a way that they can think for themselves, and all they need is corrective feedback, right? But they can come to this themselves in an essential way, right? So this is why I do it. And then I would say the second time, most of the time, what happens is they will say, "Oh, I did a mistake here, and now I understand it better," and then they will try to correct it themselves, right? And if I see there's like a game-breaking thing, for example, I see they taking the, for example, just example, they taking bad runes which make it impossible to even contest that lane. I would say, "Hey," then I would cut it. I would say, I think you might want to think your rune choices. And if they, then I would wait, like give them 2 minutes as a certain time frame where they have to like address it. And if they don't come to the conclusion on their own, then I would jump in and say, okay, this is the rune set that you might take. And then I would sometimes not give them explanation why. And I tell them after the game, I want you to tell me the difference between your rune set and the one that I gave to you, and why, or which one is better and why. So it's not like I'm telling them what to do and they just do it. They also have to think about why I tell them, like why I had the intention of making them think like that. So this is what I do. And then most of the time, what happens in the third set, right, after between the second and third set, then I would come in with corrective information and say, okay, let's take a quick look at what we have done so far, right? And you tell your perspective on what went wrong in the first one and the second one, and then I give my perspective in how I see things, and showing and picturing, this is what I want you to do, and this is why I want you to do it, also giving the explanation, and then say, okay, next thing, remember, this is the good part that you did, right? Take this and keep building on it, and now this, try to implement one thing, right? What, depending on the level of play, you have to like pick them up where they are. This is the core breaking thing that you that we have to correct, or the behavior that we have to correct. And then the third thing that will be applied, and then you layer and layer and layer, right, until you say the practice session is over.
I think to add to that, and kind of to the point of like coming back to the time of the session, and we're just taking positional coaching, or like that laning phase, for example. And I think you can do this for a lot of session intentions. There's no reason why we can't tell our players, hey, hit level 3, got all 3 of your abilities. Doesn't matter if you level up, just don't put any more points in your abilities. Don't level your ult up. Don't put any more points. Then, even though they're level 18, they're not buying any more items. It feels like level 3. You've sampled the level 3, even though it isn't level 3. So they don't even have to back out the game. You can play for 30 minutes just non-stop. They can just go 30 minutes. You just pause, you give them a quick corrective feedback. You're now on the sideline. It feels more like football. The ball is moving, the wave is moving, the wave is the ball here. That continuously moves, and you can just come in and say, consider this, try and look for a freeze. Next person to hold a freeze for 30 seconds wins. And now it's a competition. You can do all these things, and it really comes down to being really creative as a coach to find these little nuggets of practice that really helps us expedite and make this training, this practice environment really enjoyable and really valuable. Ultimately, not every player is going to win worlds. Not every player we work with is going to win, and not every player is going to even make it to fulfill their potential. The worst thing we can have is players leaving our coaching environment thinking, I don't want to play league again. What a fucking waste of my time this competitive career has been. That's when we failed as coaches. I'll be honest. There's a few players out there that I've done disservice to, and I'm sorry, right? But if we're more conscious about how we approach this practice environment becomes so much more enjoyable, so much more valuable, and then those players that we showed valuable coaching experiences to and coaching environments to, when they retire from being a player, they'll think about, hey, do I want to coach? And if they go become a coach, they will also coach in this better, different way from the status quo. And now we're creating a very healthy coaching ecosystem, training ecosystem, and then the talent development system at all levels improves. That's my rose-tinted, rosy dream for esports and how I want to change it. that's pretty much it for this presentation. So any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, I would like to go sleep.
How late is it for you, Kabir?
It's not that late. It's only 9 o'clock. So
Okay.
it's not too bad.
Where are you from, Kabir, or where are you living?
Well, I'm from India. I'm and
Yeah,
I'm
I
back
do
in
know that.
India at the
Okay.
I'm back in India at the moment. I was in the UK last week, and I flew back this week because
Okay.
I'm moving to Australia in 2 months.
Oh, okay. To do your PhD?
Yeah, to start my PhD. Yeah.
By the way, Kabir, I would be really interested in looking over my methodology with you in close proximity to today, so next few days. So if you do find the time, we can sort it, because I really appreciate the feedback that you just gave, especially in this last segment, right? And I feel like there's a lot more to be done, and I'm always looking for different ways to innovate my framework and to change things here and there to improve it, right? So I would be really interested in listening what you have to say about the framework I employ.
Yeah, for sure. We'll find a time. I think I'm traveling tomorrow. Me and my parents are just taking a day trip. And
Mhm.
we're not sure if we're staying at the place we're staying. We're going to.
Mhm.
I'll let you know the second I know. If I'm
Mhm.
not available this weekend, then I think Tuesday is probably the best day to touch base
Okay.
and move forward
Okay.
that way.
Okay. By the way, you have a, not to be grammar, please, but you have a badly written word in your slides.
Oh no. Where?
Where you say individuals in the slide before groups. I didn't want to point it out during the
Oh
presentation because
no.
I
No,
didn't
that's
care.
fine. No, please. Where?
No, it's